Stand name Dolly Dagger. Owner Vittorio Cataldi, 16. Destruction A, Duration A, Speed A, Control B, Range C, Potential C. Power. 70% of damage received is transferred to whoever is reflected in the dagger's blade. The remaining 30% is received normally. The stand possesses an ancient short sword from the Napoleonic era. Reflects all damage including bullets and viral attacks. A stand born of a strong desire to prove personal innocence and transfer blame and responsibility to others. Chapter 3, Sailor's Love Part 1. When the assassin team member Illuso was doing his due diligence before his fight with Fugo, the report he was given read as follows. Born 1985 to a wealthy Neapolitan family. Extremely intelligent, with an IQ of 152, accepted to university at the age of 13. However, proved to be possessed of a surprisingly short temper, argued with many professors, eventually hitting one with a 4-kilogram dictionary. Expelled, the downward spiral continued until Bucciolati took him in. This summary was not mistaken, yet was not the whole story. He had been admitted to university not as a recognition of his superior mind, but in exchange for a healthy bribe. The Fugo family was not old money. They had acquired their fortune through legally questionable trade and by encouraging risky investments in Africa shortly before the Second World War that ruined their creditors but lined their pockets. "We must have a title," was the oft-repeated mantra of Fugo's common-born grandfather. To achieve that goal, he married off Fugo's father to the daughter of a bankrupt noble, and the third son from that marriage was Panna Cotta Fugo. His elder brothers were ordinary, with nothing remarkable to their names or natures. Fugo alone showed promise from an early age. His grandfather doted on him, certain he would make the family's reputation, while in turn pressuring him to succeed. He was taught everything that could be taught and deemed to be something of a genius in virtually every field. His education was correspondingly accelerated. He was incredibly skilled and mastered nearly everything put to hand, but that very excellence meant there were limits only he perceived. As there are to us all, there were limits to his talents, but what mattered more to him was the limits he encountered in the arts and in academia. Music had peaked with Bach and Mozart. Sculpture and painting had peaked with Michelangelo and Da Vinci. Architecture had ended with Scamozzi and Bernini, mathematics with Gauss and Hegel. If the best of the best lived hundreds of years ago, what remains for me to do? As a child, he found this thought demoralizing. But if he attempted to express the sentiments to his tutors, they were patronizing and hostile. Fugo found himself friendless and loathed. Those around him had been born upper class, and for someone whose family had bought their title to be so obviously superior was unbearable. His sole source of solace was his grandmother. "Don't worry, Panny. Things may be tough right now, but the Lord will protect you." Time and again she told him this, a cake always in the oven. She was the only person who let him relax, but the rest of the family considered her an embarrassment. She was the daughter of a farmer, matched to his grandfather before he struck it rich, stuck in her old ways, while the rest of the family strove to better themselves. If Italy had not been a Catholic country, if divorce had not been a sin, she would have been cast aside long ago. But she was the only member of the family who spoke to Panna Cotta Fugo from the heart. Everyone else only saw what they needed him to be. He barely spoke to his parents. His brothers envied the attention he received and bullied him whenever they were alone together. But his grandmother's smile made it all bearable. And then she died. By then Fugo was already living away from home, studying at the Università di Bologna. He wanted to fly home at once and attend her funeral, but his grandfather forbade it. There was no need. Fugo couldn't believe his ears. He took a test the day she died. He failed it. He was summoned to the professor's office. The moment he stepped in the door, the professor was furious. He believed the results showed Fugo didn't take him seriously. He was so good in all the other classes. How else could he be so bad in his? What are you thinking? This is a core subject! Take it seriously! How dare you look at me like that? Blindsided by this, Fugo admitted that his grandmother had died. This only enraged the professor further. Don't be ridiculous! Your family said no such thing! Even if it were true, it's a pathetic, childish excuse. Your grandmother? Grow up! You can't hang off her apron strings forever! By this point, Fugo was no longer listening. The next thing he knew, he'd picked up the dictionary on the professor's desk and was beating him over the head with it. He didn't even feel the anger. He felt no hate, no desire to kill the man. His heart was filled with a stony, implacable certainty that this man could not be forgiven. No other course of action existed. From that day forth, Fugo was no longer upper class. He beat up the security guards who came running and was arrested. In the interview room, the confused police explained, "We contacted your family, but they said they didn't know you. No one's coming to bail you. If they don't change their minds, you'll be sent to a home." Fugo said nothing in response. He remained silently in his cell for as long as they could hold him, until one man came to see him. He'd never seen the man before, but he was young. When he asked, the man said he was only 17. "My name's Bruno Bucciolati. I've been checking up on you. Seemed like you might be worth meeting." Fugo knew what he was at a glance. "You're a gangster?" he asked. Bucciolati nodded. "I am. How did you know?" "You're dressed well, but you don't seem high class. You move too well to be a student, but you don't have the posture of a soldier. What else could you be?" "I see you're as quick as they say, and as bold. You don't seem like you're afraid of me. Why is that?" "It's not that I'm not scared." "Not only that, but the situation you find yourself in should be pretty terrifying. Your parents have abandoned you." Fugo laughed bitterly. "No, they're afraid of me now. If what I did gets out, they think it'll damage the family's reputation. Their only option is to disinherit me, insist I have no ties to them. They're terrified." Bucciolati frowned. "You seem awfully calm about it. Did you beat that man to hurt your parents?" "No, they never entered my mind. I simply couldn't forgive him, or anything else." Bucciolati put his hand to his chin, thinking. "If you end up in the home, what'll happen to you?" "Nothing much," Fugo shrugged. "They'll put me through whatever the minimum educational requirements are, then put me out on the street." "So you've no intention of going home?" "Home?" For a second, Fugo didn't know what he meant. When he saw that, Bucciolati nodded. "If you've got nowhere better to go, what say you help me with my work?" At long last, Fugo realized the young gangster had been interviewing him. "You mean join your gang?" "It's not mine. I'm still bottom rung. I don't even have any men to call my own. Like you said, I'm low-born. I'm a fisherman's son. My father was proud of his work, and I'm not embarrassed by it. But I'm not exactly well educated. I need friends with knowledge and wits. Friends like you." Bucciolati looked straight into his eyes. Fugo met his gaze and held it. It was a strange sensation. He was being asked to join a criminal organization, to rank beneath a bottom-rung thug. Yet he reminded Fugo of his grandmother. Was it because he wasn't lying? Because he was simply stating what he genuinely felt? "You need me." "I do." "What makes you say that?" "When you spoke of your parents, I saw no desire for revenge. You must hate them, but not obsessively. I get worked up too easily. I could use a level head around." "A level head? My temper's so short I beat a professor over the head with a dictionary." Bucciolati's eyes narrowed. He was lucky. "Huh?" "He was lucky you didn't kill him. You'd lost it completely. You never once stopped to think that he might die." Fugo was at a loss for words. "I came to see you because I wanted to look you in the eye," Bucciolati continued. "I wanted to see what kind of guy you were. You have the same eyes I did when I was 12. The eyes of a killer. Whatever the reason may be, you have the eyes of someone who could kill without a second's thought." Bucciolati paused to see what effect his words were having. "You have no shot at rehabilitation. That's why I'm inviting you. You can no longer live in their world." Fugo lay on an uncomfortable bed in a cheap hotel, staring at the ceiling. If Bucciolati had not come to see him, what would have happened to him? He could never have survived in the normal world, but being a member of the mob from the get-go had been such a huge advantage, it was hard to imagine what other course he could have taken. No, that's not true. I've seen that fate with my own eyes. Fugo had seen a boy whose life had been very much like what Fugo's could have been. Narancha Girga. If I hadn't... A knock on the door interrupted his reverie. The door was open, but Sheila-E knocked anyway. "Hello, I'm knocking," she said. Fugo sat up and looked at her. She jerked her chin at him. "Come, they sent the reinforcements." Fugo stood up and headed down the hall. Sheila-E followed him, letting him lead. "Why'd you leave the door open? Anyone could get in." "Can't hear people coming if I shut it." "You claustrophobic?" Fugo didn't respond. "I hear your stand will kill you if you get infected. How'd you figure that out?" "Bucciolati helped. Infected just a bit of flesh on my side and it began to melt. Quickly cut the flesh away, saved the rest of me." "Bruno Bucciolati, the one who died. They say he was very good. Giorno trusted him completely. You were wasted on him." The story, as she'd heard it, was a little different, but... "Yeah," Fugo said, having no argument with it. "Your power only works at about 5 meters, Sheila-E continued. "But if it can infect you, then you need to keep at least a meter away from it. You need to get in close, but can't get too close. Tough stand to use. I can understand why you prefer to be out in the open, but enemies won't be so accommodating." "I know." Sheila-E didn't seem to hear him. She frowned and lowered her voice. "So, this guy they've sent to help, Morello. You ever heard of him?" "No, the name doesn't ring a bell." "Maybe I shouldn't say this, but I find it hard to trust him. We'd better be careful." "What do you mean?" "You'll know when you see him," she said, scowling. At the far end of the floor was a door. As they approached, a grumpy voice from inside called out, Stop! Don't knock! The vibrations drive me batty. I know you're there, so just don't knock." The words tumbled out of him. Fugo glanced at Sheila-E, but she just scowled and said nothing. He shrugged and tried to go in without knocking, but the door was locked and didn't open. Do you mind unlocking it?" he asked politely. "This'll never do." The voice sounded even grumpier. What?" "What you just said. Which is it?" "Which is what?" "Were you polite because you know deep down you can never match Mr. Morello and wish to show your respect? Or were you just making a nominal show of politeness to someone who you have no real opinion of? Be clear!" Fugo turned and looked at Sheila-E again. Her lower lip jutted out, but she said nothing. Fugo said, "If you're the man Mr. sent, then I believe he said where to follow your instructions." That seemed safe enough. There was a long silence, but at last he heard the sound of the lock turning. He waited for the door to open, but this did not happen, and eventually he reached out and opened it himself. The room was much larger than Fugo's, but it was a cheap hotel, so not remarkably large. A man sat on a chair in the center of it. An old-fashioned man. He looked like he'd stepped out of a 1930s mob movie, wearing clothes designed to advertise his position in the mob. He wore a Borsalino hat, even though he was indoors. There was a scarf around his shoulders. The overall impression was that he was trying so hard to look slick, it wound up being oddly comical. Fugo tried not to let it show, but this man reminded him of the first person Polpo had ordered him to kill with purple haze. His target had been a made man in another syndicate, responsible for selling drugs in town. He dressed to the nines but begged for his life, selling out his own people. This man had the same smell to him. "So," the man said, looking Fugo over. "You're the one with the extremely dangerous stand, Panna Cotta Fugo." "Yes, I am." "Well, you look pretty weak. A green kid. All book smarts, no street smarts. I thought you'd be a hardened killer." "Ah, well, my name is Canolo Morello. I'm a proper Passione member. I run the information analysis team." "You don't run it. You're the only member. Sheila E. snapped. Murolo glared at her. Shut up, Sheila E. I know you were the go-between for the boss's bodyguards and those traitors on the assassin team. They don't trust you, so they've sent you on this mission to clear your name. Sheila E. didn't bat an eye. You got the same deal, Murolo. Mista told me. You gave information to Risotto after he turned traitor. Murolo went white as a sheet, then turned bright red. He jumped to his feet, nearly knocking his chair over. No, don't be ridiculous. I just didn't know he turned traitor. And it's not like I gave him any critical information. I just reconstructed a burned photograph they brought in. There was nothing in the photo but a picture of Santa Lucia Station in Venice. The one with the lion statues. There are pictures of it everywhere. Who cares? It couldn't have meant anything. I don't know. Mista made it sound like you screwed them pretty bad. Ah, stop making stuff up. You didn't feed him any lies about me, did you? I simply told him the truth. By whose definition? The two of them seemed ready to start throwing punches. Annoyed, Fugo interrupted. If you don't mind, I'd like to talk about the job. Clearly they've lit a fire under all our asses, so I don't think this is the time for petty squabbles. Murolo clamped his mouth shut, looking sulky, and sat down on his chair. Sheila E. remained impassive but snorted defiantly. Murolo coughed, composing himself, then began laying documents out on the table. One of the photographs made Fugo frown. He recognized the person in it. Is he? You know him? That's suspicious. He was part of Passione. I'm asking the questions here. How do you know this man? Massimo Volpe was top secret. Nobody knew about him. Secret? Fugo couldn't hide his confusion. What was going on? He knew the man, but before he threw himself into this blood-stench underworld. Volpe's an old friend of mine, he said. Murolo and Sheila E. both gave him looks of deep suspicion. What are you talking about? He's 10 years older than you. I was in college when I was 13, Università di Bologna. Volpe was in the same class as me. Fugo picked up the picture and looked closer at it. The same dark rings under his eyes, the eyes like clouded glass. He'd barely changed at all. Hello everyone, thank you very much for listening to this episode. We're going to finish off by quickly doing some discussion on some of the things that were brought up in this chapter. So, perhaps the biggest thing to me is the reveal of Fugo's backstory, which we didn't actually have in Vento Oreo, because if you guys don't know, Araki actually intended Fugo to be a traitor to Bucciolati's team. However, due to personal reasons, Araki decided that was a bad idea, and that never came to pass, which is why Fugo just disappears from the story. And of course, it's the reason why we never got a backstory for him. But here, we actually see a complete backstory to Fugo. We see the reason he joined the gang, we see why he's so faithful to Bucciolati and all that. And I'd say it's kind of a generic backstory, the person he loves the most dies, and nobody else is there to care for him, so, he just goes off the deep end. But then, luckily for him, someone is willing to take care of him, basically, and show him the love that his grandmother had shown him. That, of course, is Bruno. So let's talk about Bruno for a bit. Jesus, just saying Bruno's name reminds me of the terrible, terrible accent I gave him. I'm so sorry, guys, but I wanted to show less of the noble, idealistic Bruno that we get in Vento Oreo, and more of the commoner that Bruno is. Born as a fisherman's son, isn't very well educated. I wanted to give that voice to him, and yeah, it ended up being kind of like a London thug voice. Reminds me of JoJo Abridged, when Jonathan goes to Ogre Street, and then there's a guy going, "Yeah, I'm gonna sling ya!" Wow, so I thought it was very natural to give Bruno that voice. If you guys feel otherwise, then be sure to leave that in the comment section below. The other big thing was the standard description of Dolly Dagger right in the beginning. I'm going to be reading all of that. This audiobook is pretty much going to be the complete edition. Everything that is in the book will certainly be either on the video, if it's an illustration, or in the audio, obviously, if it's words that I can read out. But the thing I specifically wanted to add about the stand in question, Dolly Dagger, was it's very interesting to see a stand that is bound to a dagger, We haven't seen bound stands for a while now in JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, especially in part 5 where nearly every single stand has a physical form, versus part 3 for example where they specifically point out at a certain points, I think it's when they fight the younger Darby, they're like, wow, it's actually a physical stand, it's not a stand that's just bound to a physical object. A particular part 3 stand that comes to mind is Anubis, which was a stand bound to a sword which would then possess the sword holder. Of course, Dolly Dagger isn't that confusing, it's just the stand is inside the dagger. And in fact, it might be bound to any reflective surface, because the power isn't dependent on the thing it is bound to being a dagger, it's bound on being reflective. So it might be more effective if it was bound to a mirror. So yes, this is another mirror stand after Man in the Mirror and after Hanged Man, so things are getting pretty crazy. The next thing that I quickly want to talk about is Canolo Murolo. Again, my lack of skill in working accents is at display here as I try and do like this very Western accent, but obviously I'm not that good at it. I was gonna do more of like a New York accent, like the classic mobster movies, but that is completely beyond my reach. I don't even want to attempt it. For your sanity's sake. But yeah, Canolo's kind of an interesting character. We'll be seeing more of him next chapter, so I'm not going to talk too much about him here. And of course other stuff like the fact that Massimo and Fugo were actually classmates. Stuff like that should be much more prominent and interesting to talk about next episode. So with all that out of the way, I don't think there's anything else I really want to talk about. You know, Sheila E and Fugo had that little conversation about Fugo's stand. I don't think there's much to it other than just kind of expositing what Fugo's stand actually is and how it works. But yeah, with all that being said, again, thank you very much for listening. If you have any thoughts or feedback that you want to share, please leave that in the comment section below and I will be sure to read it. Of course, if you enjoyed this video or you didn't like it at all, then you know what to do with the likes and the dislikes and all that YouTube stuff. And of course, if you guys are excited about future videos, then be sure to subscribe so you know when they are coming out. And so we've come to the end of the episode. All I can really say now is I will see you next chapter.